Hi, hi everyone. Good afternoon to our colleagues in Asia. Good morning for those tuning in Europe and other parts of the world. We're really excited for this session about climate risks in Asia and how much institutions know about these risks, the role of disclosures and risk assessments, and we're also especially lucky to have Ms. Vicki Robertson, who is the Chief Executive and Secretary for Environment in the Ministry of Environment in New Zealand. New Zealand, as many of you know, has been a leader in environmental policy and is making some impressive strides, especially around climate disclosure. So Vicki is going to talk a bit about her work and the experience and importance of these types of disclosures, both for her country as well as the Asia Pacific region as a whole. So over to you, Vicki.
Kia ora, and thank you, David. Thank you for the invite, and great to talk to you today. I just want to do three things, just a little bit of New Zealand context. I know most of you will know our context, but just to remind you a little bit of what we're doing here as a venture between public and private sector, and a little bit around how we're helping New Zealanders understand climate risk. And then just to preface this, we are 4 days out from an election, so I will give you a high level detail. And I know today you've got some great experts who are into how things work on the ground, so on your panel, so that'll be great to hear from them. Just the New Zealand context, few countries in the world are as dependent on their natural resource base for the well-being of their society, and for us the prosperity of our economy as well, than New Zealand. And if you take a natural capital per capita measure as just one measure, the World Bank estimates we rank 8th out of 120 countries on natural capital per capita. So pretty important for us to know and understand what the future of that huge wealth of what we call a taonga, or a treasure for our country. We currently have a strong architecture in place around managing climate change, with our introduction of a new net zero carbon targets through our new Act, and they are for 2050. And we have requirements on the government to develop and implement policies for climate change mitigation and adaptation. We have also set up an independent climate commission who are to report next year on what the first set of 5-year budgets should be for each sector of the economy, and the government has to respond to that advice by the end of next year. So well on the way to kind of making progress in that. Like other countries, we're busy navigating COVID-19 and impacts of that, and trying to work out how do you build a resilient recovery into the future, and resilient to future shocks. The other context for us is our banking system is the predominant funding source of New Zealand businesses, and a lot of our businesses are very, very small, medium enterprises. And when we talk about that, that's under 5 employees. That's the majority, I think 80% of our businesses. So quite small businesses, quite a few of them. Our banks are Australian owned, many of them, and so therefore facing different types of risks, opportunities, depending, whether you take a Australian country risk versus a New Zealand country risk. And I think the question about the Asia risk is also important in there, and I know that's a topic of conversation. We're just also reflecting, as many are at the moment, about how we manage systemic risks. As a country, we have, have had to manage natural hazard risk, but what happens when you get green swans, in the words of the Bank of International Settlements, and pandemics and the climate change risks fit within there. So a little bit of context. How are we going? What are we doing on sustainable finance in particular? And for my part, this is one of the unlocking mechanisms, I think, and most people will have talked about that, I'm sure, in this forum. So we have, because we're quite a small country, we have the pleasure and beauty of being able to bring a whole lot of diverse people together and get some traction happening. So we've set up a joint venture between the private and public sector, which is called the Aotearoa Circle. And one of its work streams is around sustainable finance. And there's a Sustainable Finance Forum. And its aims is really to lay out a pathway to a sustainable finance system in Aotearoa, New Zealand by 2030. So this forum brings together key players in our financial system, banks, insurance, civil society, policy, academia, all in one group. And it's probably following a process led really global leadership on sustainable finance from countries such as the European Union, UK, Canada, China, and a number of other countries throughout Asia. So we're in good company with and following some of that great lead. The roadmap that this forum is producing for how we might get to that place will be released later this year, and looking forward to that. We've had an interim report, so that gave us some indication of where that will land. And it details actions that both the government sector but also private sector might need to take to get to that sustainable finance system in the future. Another part of that forum is looking at the definition around sustainable agricultural finance. So a lot of our economic activity is in our primary or food and fibre sectors, and so how do banks think about what sustainable agriculture is and manage for the risks around that given climate change? 5 of our major banks are working with our Ministry of Primary Industries around the definition of that for New Zealand, and again following others in the world who are looking at that that area. That definition will be used by the finance sector in considering agriculture lending and investment, and we're seeing quite a bit of movement in early days just in changes to how banks are thinking about that lending and investment. So it's kind of an excellent example to the question about how banks are involved in actually creating the new solutions or a pathway forward in New Zealand, and trying to embed climate risk in particular in their decision making. So really good progress there, and still a lot to do. We're also doing quite a bit of work on just helping New Zealanders understand climate risk and opportunity. So we have had TCFD proposals put in front of the government, and as I said, we're in election time, so yet to be seen when the next government comes in what they'll do with those, but they did announce a proposal that introduces a mandatory climate-related financial disclosure system for all listed issuers, large banks, insurers, investment managers, and captures about 90% of the assets under management in New Zealand, so is reasonably a significant proposal. And it's just really interesting, the shift in New Zealand to something that we didn't really talk about even 12 months ago, to really moving into thinking about how we might manage climate risk at the business level, and thinking about it as a financial risk. So that framework, that proposal, is based on the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and would be implemented through a standard that would be developed by our external reporting board. So it gives you a sense of where we're at on that. We'll see where that gets to with a new government, but hopefully that goes into being implemented. My understanding is that probably banks are the most advanced organisations in New Zealand in terms of understanding and managing their climate risks, and I would add to that our superannuation fund. They are quite advanced in how they would apply a TCFD type approach, and our banks have such a crucial role to set the industry norms and the quality of disclosures that we might see for New Zealand in the future. So pretty important to have them working alongside policymakers, I think. We've also done a few other things that are of interest. One is around we, under the new Act, had to publish a New Zealand's first national climate risk assessment earlier this year, identifying the top 43 priority risks for New Zealand. And we, under the Act, also have to come up with a advice on an adaptation plan in response to those risks. So that is the work that will be coming through into the next couple of years. We as an agency, the Secretary for the Environment under Environment Reporting Act, has a role of doing independent state of the environment report, and tomorrow we release a atmosphere and climate report, which basically says where are we at as a country on our atmosphere and climate state, I suppose. Doesn't go into what we should be doing about it. That doesn't allow us to under the Act, but it does give New Zealanders a sense of where things are at. We did a bit of work which we haven't released yet, actually, with the Stockholm Resilience Centre with Johan, who I think was part of the forum earlier, to translate the planetary boundaries framework to New Zealand. So that's another way of kind of opening up where we're at as a country. So we yet to release that, but it's trying to get into the conversation around we haven't got abundance forever as a country, and there are risks to the quality of life and our way of living. So trying to get into that conversation in a way that helps for New Zealanders. Just the final thing I would say is we've made quite rapid progress quite quickly for two reasons. One is we can come together as a small nation and get everybody in the same room or in the same Zoom, in the same hui. But the other bit is that the collaboration and understanding what others are doing has helped us. We haven't created anything from scratch, really. We've looked around the world and seen what others are doing. So I really hats off to this forum, bringing together and collaboration across the finance sector, policymakers, climate scientists in one fora actually gets us more rapid progress, in my experience. So I think just a big hats off to the organisers of this forum, and just a welcome and a thank you to those who are doing great work around the world. Thank you, David.
Great. Well, Vicky, thank you so much. Honestly, it's great to have you and the leadership that New Zealand has been showing on this issue. I know for many of us in this space, it was a particularly exciting development to see the news about these plans, and so it's really great to have you here to further elaborate and talk about how you see that and the full perspective on why this kind of work matters, not just on climate, but on the environment more generally. And I think many of us will agree that these pieces really do fit together. It's not just simply about a single issue or single topic, but even within climate, I think climate is ultimately all about integrative systems. And this is why when we think on the transition side about integrated assessment models, there's a need to think of how physical systems, economic systems, social systems react and respond. And I think that those considerations are going to be critically important. And so we're really lucky to have on the panel some individuals from the region who will be able to offer some pretty valuable perspectives. Before I go into our panel discussion and our panel introductions, just to say a few words from the UNEP-FI side, I think a lot of the work that we've done over the past year, specifically in the banking pilot, has been really working on helping institutions to expand their toolkit, to build skills, build knowledge. And specifically, if we think of three areas that we looked at, I think these are three important pillars for understanding climate risks. And so that's looking at climate scenarios on the physical and transition side, looking at assessment methodologies to translate those scenarios into something that is important for decision makers, for risk managers. So that's the tools that would be used. And then finally, the governance and disclosure side. How do you take the insights you have, disclose them publicly to improve your TCFD disclosures, but also to make sure that these policies are not just being reported on, but actually implemented and actually making meaningful change within your organization. So over the past year, I was fortunate to lead that program for 39 institutions, many of whom are based in Asia and the Pacific region. And at the same time, we had a number of other programs ongoing, including our property working group that's looking specifically at risks to real estate. And so, as I said, we're particularly lucky to be able to talk about some of these different angles from those who have been involved in programs, as well as those who are in the no pun intended ecosystem of this climate risk topic. And so, we're lucky to have Calvin Kwan, who is the head of sustainability at Link Asset Management. Also, Junichi Fujino, who's a senior researcher at IGES, and Rosemary Bissett, who's the head of sustainability, governance, and risk at National Australia Bank. She'll be hopefully joining us shortly, but I'm really excited to hear from these speakers. Calvin with a angle on some of our property working group and real estate. Junichi as a leading researcher at a really important institution for helping the Asia Pacific region understand the specific risks it faces. So with that, I will give it over to Calvin to say a bit about his work, his experience through some of our pilot programs, as well as his perspectives on risks within the region. So I think, Calvin, you're muted. I heard you before, but let's see. It doesn't say you're muted, but
Okay.
there we are. Okay.
I just want to say thank you, David, for the invitation, and also Vicky. Thank you both for your opening remarks. You guys actually touched on a couple of key points that I want to touch on my sharing as well. But I think that's good because it shows that we're quite aligned on some of the challenges that we may face. So what I'd like to do is actually share a little bit on the work that that Link has been doing in conjunction with other real estate companies around the world, particularly through the UNEP FI Property Working Group. I will focus on three areas. One's going to be collaboration. Second's going to be alignment and common language. And then the third point is going to be about ease, just getting things done easily. On the first part about collaboration, you heard it from Vicky, where these issues about climate change require many organizations to deal with together collaboratively. No single organization can really address the challenges of climate change. We really need that coordinated collaborative effort. Now, for the real estate sector, when we talked about TCFD about 1.5 years ago, I think a lot of us understood that this is where we should be going. We have physical assets, and we know that climate change is going to affect our portfolio. The problem ends up being that a lot of our real estate colleagues are located all around the world. We have different geographies, different locations, different data. So the first thing that we did for the TCFD pilot was really to align on terminology, sources of data, and also the expectations for data quality. The whole point of this is really to be able to make sure that when you compare real estate, you should be able to find results that are comparable across geographies. By aligning with a methodology that multiple real estate companies have come together to develop, then it produces a result that you can compare. You can compare against each other. That was one of the key things that we wanted to do. I think Vicky mentioned before that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. That wasn't the intent. And the fact that quite a few of the real estate participants early on knew that they had to deal with this, but had no idea where to go with this. The fact that we all banded together to come up with a methodology was very useful. That leads to my second point about having a common language and alignment. It wasn't enough that it was just real estate companies dealing with this TCFD methodology. We actually brought in investors as well, or investors were involved early on. Because in the end, it's a lot of the investment communities are asking us whether we are climate change resilient, whatever that means, right? And how do you know that you're climate change resilient? And investors, before we engage with them, from just discussions between Link and our own investors, we noticed that a lot of our investors were asking these questions about TCFD, but they were asking different questions. Some investors were asking about a 1.5 degree strategy, some were asking about 3 or 2, and there wasn't much alignment from that standpoint either. So by the TCFD project that we worked on, by bringing investors in early to help develop that methodology, again, we have a similar situation where the people that will use this data, the investors, understand how to interpret the data as well. So by doing so, we're hoping that we can create that ecosystem where you can track, you can monitor performance, track how companies are doing, and continually have a dialogue between investors and the real estate companies for improvement. The last part is really about ease. And again, when you have multiple companies, multiple organizations working on one methodology, it's a lot easier to get buy-in to use a specific methodology. The TCFD methodology that we developed together is actually very simple for us to use. All it required was the real estate companies to input literally just the coordinates of their physical assets, some of the electricity data as well, and it's able to give us a very rough estimate of what our impacts might be, what our financial impacts might be associated with climate change over a certain period of time. And again, because this methodology is quite easy, then many different companies can use it. And again, you can also have the investors interpret the results in a particular way. That being said, there are some drawbacks to this because we aimed to get more people to use it. Some of the challenges have been that the methodology does not take into account very granular data. So we don't do assessments at small district or even city level yet. We don't get to take into account some of the mitigation measures that might already be in place. And these are questions that will eventually come up. But the whole point, again, was that we had 25 or 26 investors in real estate companies really piloting this and developing this methodology. There's a lot of work to be done. This has only been phase 1, where we're already exploring phase 2, and to see where it goes. Regardless of how we move forward, the key is going to be this. We need to get additional industries or sectors to participate. The first one was investors and real estate. David, you've been working on one with banking as well, and we've had discussions with the insurance sector. I think that the future iterations of any TCFD methodology, at least for real estate, should also involve the banking and insurance sectors as well. So thanks, David. Those are just my quick remarks.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Calvin. It's really great to hear and important to think about the ways in which real assets are going to be impacted. I think unlike certain elements more of the transition, physical assets both have the physical risks clearly inherent in them, but also changing economic conditions, whether that relates to regulations, to energy efficiency, to other government policies that support or promote insurance on them. So I think that it's a particularly important issue because it really is at that vanguard of climate impacts. And so it's really great to get your perspective. And as far as some of those impacts, we're really lucky to have Junichi here, Dr. Junichi, who will talk to us about some of his work and how that fits into broader forecasting and modeling within the region. And just a couple words on this, just to say, I think it's incredibly important to have granularity. Obviously, everyone thinks about this in the physical side, and clearly physical impacts. It matters whether you're talking about a property in the first line of beachfront or the third, or you're talking about something at 3 meters of sea level or 10. But while everyone knows that, and there's a lot of work there, as far as economic conditions and as far as the dynamics there, very often we don't necessarily recognize some of the more local nuances that need to be accounted for both in policy, and clearly this is a region that geographically is diverse and also diverse in terms of government, in terms of economics. So there's a lot to consider as a modeler, and I'm really interested to hear what Dr. Junichi has to say about some of these things, especially given the importance of granularity for regional assessment. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting panel. Also, I need to say sorry, my very bad looking because of my bad risk management. I hit my head by my too much drinking, and so I need to think about my risk first. But anyhow, I'd like to share my experience last 20, 30 years. Yeah, I joined the AIM integrated modeling team since 2000, and I'm a guy who operates kind of the mitigation model. And then my team also covers the impact assessment modeling. So then we couple the mitigation side and also adaptation side for last 20 years. And then now, because of the climate change, now adaptation impact part becomes much more important. Also now downscaling is the key challenges, how we can show the more specific, more precise seasonal or more local data for the understanding what will be happen in the local. I'd like to share the several cases in Japan nowadays. Now we have a huge typhoon several times. It's quite similar to the Asia Pacific, but now in Japan, we have a quite a big climate risk, and then people get aware much more rather than the last 10, 20 years. This year in Kumamoto area, Kyushu, there was a very heavy rain, and then there are overflow from the dam, Kawabe Dam, and then there are many casualties. This area, they try not to develop the dam too much. And then they try to having green infrastructure to cover the adaptation side, and also to having the good ecosystem. But because of the heavy rain, now the local stakeholder mentioned that they need dam. But some engineer mentioned that if they develop dam, this dam may not prevent from the huge damage. So still, we need more data or more analysis, or we need more a future assessment of the climate impact. Otherwise, the dam, it's easy to develop, and then it may have some loss, but it may change all the ecosystem, and then they may reduce the value of the nature, or also the community. So it's like a trade-off, and then this area, Kumamoto area, now faced a big need to decision. So we need more precise climate risk or climate impact data. This is the first thing. And second thing, Fukushima. In Fukushima, as you know, that there is a nuclear power plant accident last 10 years, and then still there is the radioactive matters. We removed a lot of the radioactive matters from the soils on the ground, but the forest area still, it's quite difficult to remove all from the radioactive matters from the forest. And then last year, there was a huge typhoon to Fukushima. It's quite surprised. Fukushima people never believed that they had such a big typhoon. So now there are a lot of TV that is, remind that is how the impact of the typhoon. And then this coming Saturday, I will join the a symposium on focusing on the climate and also SDGs in Koriyama, Fukushima, targeting the 10 years old kids. Because we need to think about the future together with the kids in Fukushima, how they'd like to become the Fukushima will be the much nicer place rather than just the accident place. So Fukushima also needs more precise data when they really want to having good management of the radioactive matter and also climate situation, because how the radioactive matters in the forest area move. So we also need such the local, more precise data. And then Asia Pacific. When we support the many Asian cities through the climate or SDGs, I just cover like 30, 40 cities in ASEAN to support the SDGs. And now they also need having such the how they also have disaster proof development, because they need renewable energy or energy saving, but also they need to consider about how to tackle with typhoon or local heavy rain or flooding. And so this kind of data is really connected to the finance. Because when they like to develop the new infrastructure, they need a good finance, but who will ensure the value of the finance. And then so now about the climate science, we need to look more on the uncertainty, but also the how much sure such the local impact will happen in 10 years, 20 years. So this is kind of the experience or the the latest news from Asia. Thank you very much.
Great. Sorry, I was just muted there. So yeah, thank you so much. And I think it's really interesting work that you're doing, and we're quite excited to see future outputs, especially as time goes on. I think that not only do models continue to incorporate the latest information on the physical systems, but also on economic systems and behavior. And I think that's particularly important, because the assumptions being fed into these models in many ways are what helps us to understand the pathways we follow, how steep those falls need to be, or how gradual certain changes can be. But I think that's, as I said, just really important work, and some work that we're really eager to see and to continue to support. So as we're working on getting Rosemary to join, and she'll talk a bit about the banking work, just to open it up to each of you more, more generally. I think you talk about this, but to put a finer point on it, I'm interested to hear from both of you. What do you see as the major hazards in the region when it comes to climate? There's some of the kind of obvious ones. People think of storms, but are there particular areas and particular sectors that you see experiencing disproportionate risk, or areas that those who maybe are less familiar with climate risks would say, oh, I didn't realize that was a climate impact or a potential transition impact? So just interested to hear kind of what is top of mind for you when it comes to these particular risks.
Okay, I'll give a quick try at that one. I think for Link, a lot of our portfolio is in Hong Kong, and we've actually found out that Hong Kong is a fairly resilient location. First of all, it is a dot on the map, but we're well buffered from a lot of the challenges that we have. We just had a typhoon come by yesterday. So yes, typhoons will continue to be a concern for Hong Kong. But if I think a little bit bigger picture, for example, the Pearl River Delta, one of the key issues that we are concerned about is really going to be flooding, especially coastal flooding. And we've seen that there are maps and projections of how far coastal flooding may go, depending on how big storm surges are and so forth. And there's a lot of areas in PRD that could potentially be flooded regularly. Something like that is going to be key for us to consider and look at, especially while we look at different acquisitions in the region. Clearly you do hear about issues of high temperatures and fires in other locations, but those are not, I guess, climate-related issues that we're dealing with in Asia right now.
And
Hi, David.
hi, Rosemary. Wonderful. So if we can hear you, what I was just asking Calvin and Junichi about was specifically some of the risks that they see as being largest and most impactful, either from climate or transition. And I think that's a particularly appropriate place for you to come in to talk a bit about the work that you and NAB have done in the banking pilot, as well as in your in your own institution as well. So what I was going to do is just share some of the slides that you had put together, and then you walk through some of that.
And David,
Mm-hmm.
David, maybe don't try the slides just in case it affects memory or anything, given the connection's working, and I'll just speak to it.
Okay, wonderful. Sounds good. What?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just fine. So sounds great. So Rosemary will talk a bit about their work.
So we've really appreciated being part of both phase 1 and phase 2. It's been an extremely valuable opportunity to build our internal knowledge and capacity and implement and report on the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures recommendations. Phase 2 in particular provided us with an opportunity to see and hear from a wide range of climate risk tool, scenario and analytics providers, and to discuss and evaluate them with peers, which has been hugely valuable. One of the things I was going to show people was a highlight from the heat mapping that we did. It was something that we did in phase 2 that we didn't do in phase 1. And I think that the climate risk heat mapping is a quick and efficient way to screen your whole portfolio across sectors, subsectors, and geographical exercise.
So it seems like we lost Rosemary for a moment. What she was referring to is specifically the heaping exercise that we had done during the pilot. I think she's back now. Rosemary, are you able to speak? So just to go on from what she was saying, she was just mentioning that heat mapping exercise is a way to both do risk identification as well as assessment. I'll give it back to her if she's able to rejoin. Rosemary. So as I said, while we're fixing that, maybe just to kind of continue with the question that we had raised before, and to ask Junichi, as far as regional risks that you see and you perceive, what are some of the ones that you think listeners should be considering or contemplating for the region?
Hi.
Yep. Oh wait, now you're muted. If you just unmute.
あれ
Yep,
Oh,
all good now.
So
Wait, muted again here.
I,
Oh, now we can hear you. We can actually hear both of you.
and I'm back, David, but it's unstable connection.
Okay. So I guess
Well,
what I was just saying, Rosemary, while you were there was was just that the heat map is an important tool for institutions as far as conducting risk identification and thinking about where risk exists within their portfolio. But back over to you, and then I'll continue with the question for Junichi.
yeah, and I was just going to add that what that then means is you can identify your hotspots and focus in on the sectors that you then want to look at. So it gives you a high, medium, and low rating across sectors and across hazards and vulnerability areas. If you're looking at physical risk or in terms of risk factor pathways like direct emissions costs or indirect emissions costs for transition risk, you can kind of see where your hotspots are for certain sectors. And that led us to then focus in on sectors. So for transition risk, we were particularly interested in the high carbon intensive sectors and looked at thermal coal and mining closely. In terms of the physical risk areas, then that led us to focus on mortgages and agriculture and to do further work locally on particularly on mortgages with the Energy Transitions Hub here actually. So the other thing I was going to just I guess say in terms of highlighting key learnings was and the external collaboration is really important. So getting access through the pilot to the scientific, academic, and financial communities is really important, that we all work together. The risk analysis is hard because it's often hampered by a lack of data, and starting with what's available, even though it's not perfect, still provides really useful insights and learning. And what it means is you can refine your methodologies as you go, as you get access to better data. We also participated in some work around the opportunities framework that was presented to the group by Acclimatise. And that was really useful because, as I was going to highlight in my slides, everyone's focused on risk. But understanding risk, the other side of that, if you think about a two-sided coin, is opportunity. And when you understand that risk, you can focus on the opportunities for climate finance, environmental finance, that actually helps people mitigate the climate risk, builds resilience and adaptation in your customer base, and then that also means that you've got a less risky portfolio going forward. So the opportunity side of it, it was a big focus, and I think the tool that iClimatise has was very useful. It came to us at a time where we were refreshing our strategy, and just was a double check on what we'd done to ourselves do strategic work on the opportunities. So I think that's really worth highlighting. And then the other piece was that engaging with customers in this journey, as you look at targets and metrics, is really important. And that discussion just started to happen. So I think looking forward to phase 3 of TCFD, that will be really, really critical going into phase 3 as we look at more at the disclosures and metrics and targets, and how not only through product and opportunity do we work with our customers, but how do we encourage them to also take that net zero journey with us. But I think last comment,
Yeah.
we've got a great toolbox to work with out of participating in phase 2. Thanks, David, and sorry for the connection issues.
No, not completely not your fault. And thanks so much for your perspective. For those of you who are less familiar, Rosemary's been just a really great champion of the work that we've done within the banking pilot, both on the physical and transition risk sides. And I think it's especially valuable to get her perspective. I'll circle back to the initial panel question that I had shared as we were going to hear from Junichi, and then Rosemary, it'll be interesting to get your views, which is to ask about what do you see as the most pressing climate risks in the region, whether physical or transition, and obviously those will vary by location. So you can speak more specifically to your area within the region, but really interested as we talk about this to help people who are on the line understand what these risks might entail and might look like. So yeah, back to you, Junichi. So I think you're just muted. If you
Uh,
yes now yeah that's good. Wait, no, it went away now. Wait, still
uh,
it's coming in for like a split second. Hold on. Hold on.
なんだろうな。
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes, yes,
now, okay?
yes. All good. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
perfect.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it depends on the area. For like urban area, yeah, now, of course, the urban infrastructure, like Tokyo, it constructed like 50, 60, 70 years ago. Like New York or like Paris or like London, they developed the like urban infrastructure 100 years ago or sometime. So now there is a huge risk in such as urban infrastructure by the climate risk. How they um, how we can control not to overpass the threshold to have a huge damage. So this is one thing. Also for rural area, when we developed kind of the area around the mountain area or more nature-based area, when we have a climate impact or like a heavy rain, and this part is quite weak by such as like climate impact. So we need to know about the geography very well, how we change the geography by our human impact or human development, and then we may need to think about the how the such as climate impact. Now it becomes much bigger, and how it may affect to the such the area when we already change in some not good manner. So it depends on the area, but yeah, we need to think about the history, local history, how the like not only the oral history but also physical local history. This is the things what I now learn from the several cases. Thank you.
Wonderful. So Rosemary, from your perspective, I'd be interested to hear about what you see as the risks, and I think in some ways, given given Australia and New Zealand, I think that there are some some different parts of the some different risks related to these different parts of the Asia Pacific region. So interested to hear from you what you see as sort of the most immediate risks for physical and transition in those areas.
The physical risks are real, and they've been noted globally, I guess, as we went through our summer 2019, 2020. We've still got customers that are feeling the impacts of drought, even though we've had rain. So they need to still work through, I guess, the impacts of that on them, and we need to need to stand alongside them and support them. So the bushfires, the droughts, floods, we've seen the physical impacts, and NAB banks $1 in every $3 to agriculture in Australia, which is in the front line of feeling the impacts of the physical risks. So these are issues that are really near and dear to us, that matter when we're looking at our portfolio. Agriculture is a significant part of our portfolio. Also, looking at how, as we look at the scenario analysis and even things like the movement of cyclones down the east coast of Australia, understanding that there's a poleward shift of those likely under the climate scenarios that take us out into the future under higher temperatures, then that has an impact on, I guess, what building codes and other things need to do going forward into the future, because in the northern parts of Queensland and the northern part of Australia, the building codes are there to try and manage the risk of cyclones. But as you go down to the south, where you don't expect them, the building codes are not, planning for cyclones, and therefore requiring houses to be built in certain ways and buildings to be built in certain ways to manage that risk. So there's absolutely key physical risk. And even for New Zealand, drought can still impact agriculture in New Zealand. So we still have drought exposures there, and a variety of physical risks to manage and worry about. Even the effects of extreme temperatures. We see the effects of that on infrastructure. So the physical risks are definitely something that we need to monitor, be aware of. But at the same time, we're a carbon intensive economy. We've had a lot of coal in our power generation mix, which is slowly changing. But that actually means we do have transition risk as well, as both Australia at a state and federal level implement carbon policy, and our state governments are implementing net zero targets, and as international policy changes too, and it affects trade relationships. So we need to understand both transition and physical risk for our lending book, and to help our customers make that low carbon.
Absolutely, and following on that, with the more active role that institutions can play, I think as a last question to the group, what is the role that financial institutions have in supporting adaptation and mitigation within the region? I'd be interested to hear the perspective on real assets from Calvin, on banks and more general types of financing from Rosemary, and then with kind of a broader view from Junichi on how he sees this topic. So as I said, that'll be kind of our final question for our panelists, but eager to have either any of you jump in and share your thoughts as we go around with this last question. So Calvin, I think you're muted now.
Okay, there we go. All right. Actually, thanks for that last question. I want to build on Rosemary's answer, also my previous answer as well. If I may, entertain me just a little bit. I'd like to be just a little bit provocative in this answer about climate change, right? We do talk a lot about climate impacts on physical assets that transition and so forth. And yes, that is the primary concern. But there is an area that I'm starting to be concerned a little bit more about as well, and that's a secondary impact in regards to really the social injustice that will evolve from ongoing climate change issues. Rosemary pointed out, the point about extreme heat. Junichi talked about, typhoons going into rural areas in Japan. And a lot of this will exacerbate the social injustices that are occurring around the world. Right. So one example would be, if we have more hot days, does everybody have equal access to air conditioning or cooler weather, or cooling methods? And the answer is no. If we do not address these issues, I think that the challenges of social justice will be even greater than some of the business challenges that our organizations face. That being said, I think that banks and financial institutions play a key role in helping businesses, governments, and organizations transition. Sustainability-linked loans, green bonds, are absolutely, in my opinion, one of the best ways to incentivize businesses to make the right environmental, social, and governance decisions. There are good benchmarks for organizations to follow. We have had a lot of banks reach out to us to talk to us about sustainability-linked loans, and we're noticing that these barriers, or sorry, the targets that are being set are increasingly higher. You are now able to tie financial incentives to ESG performance. Moving forward, I do believe sustainability-linked loans will be a key way for the finance sector and borrowers to have a positive impact.
Great. Yeah. And to kind of follow on that, I'd be interested to hear from Junichi or Rosemary about your perspectives
Yeah.
on what Calvin said, as well as your takes on the role of the financial sector on this important topic.
Yeah. May I?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to say one paradox between risks in climate change and also risks in finance. I mean that if we have more risks in climate impact, we may need more green innovation. And then now it is a huge risk to have investment in such as a new developed green innovation. But now financial sector, I think now you'd like to research on impact investment, and then how the financial sector understands the risk of the technology development and also risk of the climate impact. So I'm quite interested in how the financial sector can evaluate both risk and then have the good investment into such as the new green innovation. Thank you very much.
Great. And Rosemary, maybe to give you just the last word on this question, for the role that financial institutions can play in supporting adaptation and mitigation actions within the region.
I actually think we have a really significant role to play, which is why, our strategy for the bank has identified that part of our role is to help address society's challenges, and to stand alongside our customers, because we are actually providing the capital flows so that the real economy can make those adjustments, transition to the low carbon economy, and adapt and mitigate climate change. And we can help facilitate and share knowledge with our customers as well. And the products that were mentioned before, like sustainability-linked loans, green bonds, and others, are part of the suite of growing products that are there to provide that capital to address the issues.
Yeah, I think that at least for those of us who have put this event together and within UNEP-FI, I think everything that our panelists have said about the importance of the financial sector in not only taking responsible action, but actually driving some of that change is particularly true and particularly important. So I just wanted to once more go around and thank Rosemary, Junichi, and Calvin for their time, as well as, of course, Vicky for her opening remarks. And I think it's a really important topic that we need to continue to think about and continue to engage with, for this region in particular. Not only given the diverse conditions that are faced both on the physical and transition side throughout the region, but in recognizing that as a rising region economically, there's a lot that needs to be considered, because the decisions that are made today are going to have those bigger impacts down the road. And so in some ways, it's always exciting to cover these topics, because looking at Asia Pacific is in many ways looking to the future. And so what happens in this region and what path is taken by institutions not only will have a big deal on our carbon emissions, our ability to mitigate, and our ability to adapt, but also will set practices for quite a while. So it's great to be here with with some leaders who are pushing not only their peers, but also others across the region to better manage and better address these climate risks. And as I said, I'm really excited for the rest of the sessions today, as well as the release at 2:10 Central Time of our new TCFD reports for the banking pilot. So looking forward to those, and also a number of other really great sessions. So as I said, once more, just a big thank you to those attending, as well as, of course, to our speakers. And with that, we'll conclude. So thank you.
Thank you very much.